Welcome back. Today, we are not just looking at history. We are looking at a crime scene. A crime scene so massive, so beautiful, and so omnipresent that you walk past it every day without realizing you are walking through the evidence. We are talking about the great deception of the Gothic cathedrals, specifically the anomaly we have uncovered in the heart of what we call Europe. But to understand this specific site, this massive engine disguised as a church, we first have to dismantle the programming that filters your perception of the past. You have to understand that what you call history is merely a set of agreed-upon lies written by the victors. And the victors didn't build these structures. They found them, they inherited them, and then they repurposed them. Let's start with the narrative of the founders. The mainstream historians, the gatekeepers of the chronology, would have you believe that in the 12th and 13th centuries, a sudden explosion of architectural genius occurred out of nowhere. They call it the Gothic style, a barbaric name for a barbaric people, or so they imply. Yet, look at the complexity. Look at the flying buttresses. Look at the rose windows. These are not merely decorative art. When you apply the laws of cymatics, the study of visible sound and vibration to these rose windows, you realize they are not stained glass art projects. They are frequency visualizers. They are resonance charts frozen in stone and silica. Why would a primitive, superstitious people need to encode specific vibrational frequencies into the very windows of their temples? Unless, of course, the building wasn't designed for prayer, but for transmission. We need to talk about the stone. The sheer tonnage of quarried rock required to build something like the Cologne Cathedral or the Notre Dame defies the logistical capabilities of the era they claim it was built in. We are talking about millions of tons of stone, cut with a precision that allows no sheet of paper to slide between the blocks, often without mortar. Mortar acts as an insulator. Direct stone-in-stone contact acts as a conductor. Think about that. If you are building a house, you use mortar to seal. If you are building a circuit, you need contact. The entire structure is a single, continuous piezoelectric mass. Granite and sandstone, rich in quartz and silica. Quartz is a crystal. Crystals, under pressure, generate a charge. This is basic physics, yet we are asked to believe it is coincidental. That the grandest buildings of the old worlds are essentially giant crystal lattice arranged in fractal patterns. The anomaly we are investigating today takes this impossibility to a breaking point. Located in a region that was heavily bombed during the resets of the 20th century, this structure survived. They always seem to survive, don't they? The wooden shacks of the commoners burn, the modern steel bridges collapse. But these cathedrals stand amidst the rubble like immovable mountains. This specific structure, which we will dissect over this series, possesses all the hallmarks of a Tartarian power station. It has the high-altitude, conductive spires. Originally tipped with copper or gold materials, stripped away by the parasite class during the 1800s, it has the vaulted ceilings which act as acoustic cavities to amplify resonance. And, most damning of all, it sits directly atop a major aquifer. Moving water creates a magnetic field. It creates a charge. The builders didn't just pick a pretty spot. They picked a plug. They plugged this machine into the earth itself. Imagine the world before the combustion engine, before the coal smoke choked the skies of the Victorian era. The official narrative paints a picture of mud, darkness, and candlelight. But the photographs, the rare, undoctored photographs from the mid-1800s, show us something else. They show cities with no power lines, yet the streets are lit by distinct, glowing orbs. They show cathedrals illuminating the night sky, not with fire, but with an atmospheric glow. This was the etheric energy grid. Free, wireless, atmospheric electricity harvested from the ionosphere. Pulled down through the copper-tipped spires, channeled through the iron armatures within the stone, and distributed to the populace. A civilization of abundance, of beauty, and of high technology that harmonized with nature rather than destroying it. And then, something happened. The lights went out. We are living in the ruins of that civilization. We are the survivors of a cataclysm we have been made to forget. When the inheritors took over the robber barons, the royal families, the Vatican, they couldn't destroy all the infrastructure. It was too big. It was too useful. So they did the next best thing. They changed the labels. The power station became a cathedral. The magnetron became an altar. The healing frequency chambers became choir lofts. They took the technology of the gods and turned it into a theater of guilt. They replaced the science of the ether with the dogma of suffering. And for hundreds of years, we have walked into these power plants, knelt down, and prayed to the silence, unaware that the very stones around us were once alive with the hum of free energy. In this series, we are going to walk through the doors of the Forbidden Cathedral. We are going to look at the blueprints that shouldn't exist. We are going to compare the pipe organ's massive air pressure modulators to modern acoustic levitation devices. We will show you the scorch marks of high-voltage overloads that the historians call fire damage. We will demonstrate that the metal ties holding these stones together are not for structural support, but are actually heavy-gauge wiring. By the time we are done, you will never look at a church steeple the same way again. You won't see a cross. You will see an antenna. You won't see a nave. You will see a capacitor. The old world is whispering to us, waiting for us to remember how to turn the switch back on. Let's begin the excavation. But where do we start digging? Not in the soil, but in the timeline. The official narrative asks us to suspend our disbelief to a breaking point, demanding we accept that a civilization emerging from the Dark Ages population, ravaged by plague, surviving in wooden shanties, and navigating mud roads with horse-drawn carts, somehow possessed the logistics, the mathematics, and the sheer surplus energy to construct something like the Cologne Cathedral or the Duomo of Milan. Look at the official dates. They tell us these megaliths were erected in times of scarcity, yet they represent an abundance of material and precision engineering that rivals and often exceeds the capabilities of modern skyscrapers. Let's look closer at the foundation of this lie. We are told that illiterate masons, using soft copper chisels and wooden pulleys, carved granite and limestone with laser-like precision. Have you ever tried to cut granite with a hand tool? It is an exercise in futility. Yet, we see intricate fractals, recursive geometries, and statues perched 300 feet in the air, detailing eyelashes and fingernails that no one from the ground would ever see. Why waste such labor on the invisible? Unless, of course, the purpose was not aesthetic, but functional. Unless the shape of the stone itself was dictating the flow of a frequency. We have forgotten how to measure. Consider the logistics of the stone itself. To build the great Cathedral of Strasbourg, millions of tons of stone had to be quarried, transported, and lifted. The history books speak of quarries 50, sometimes 100 miles away. They tell us of oxen teams and dirt paths. Do the math. To move that volume of material with animal power would require a convoy of carts stretching across the entire continent, moving non-stop for centuries. The roads would have been pulverized into dust within a week. The logistical support chained food for the animals, repair for the wagons, housing for the armies of workers would have required an economy larger than the empire itself possessed. It is a logistical impossibility. It is a fairy tale for adults, designed to make us believe that our ancestors were superstitious primitives who piled rocks to the sky out of fear of God, rather than sophisticated engineers who built machines to harness the power of the earth. When we strip away the religious programming, what are we looking at? We are looking at a casing, a housing unit. In modern electronics, the shape of the component dictates its function. A microchip looks the way it does because of the path the electrons must travel. A magnetron in a microwave has a specific geometric structure to oscillate energy. Now, look at the floor plan of a cathedral. We call it a cross, and we associate it with the crucifixion. But look at it with the eyes of an electrical engineer. It is a circuit board. The nave, the transept, the apses are not religious designations. They are components of a circuit designed to channel a current. Stand in the center of the nave. Look up. The vaulted ceilings are not merely decorative arches. They are acoustic amplifiers. We know today that sound is energy. We know that specific frequencies can levitate matter, boil water, and even heal cellular tissue. The architecture of these cathedrals is specifically tuned to resonate. They are stone speakers. But what were they amplifying? The official story says they were built for the Gregorian chants of monks. Do we really believe they quarried mountains of stone just to make a choir sound a little louder? Or were the chants a later addition, a ritualistic mimicry of the original vibration that once hummed through these halls? This brings us to the cymatics of the stone. Look at the rose windows, the stained glass masterpieces that adorn the facades. The historians tell us they depict biblical scenes, and indeed, The glass often does. But look at the stone tracery holding the glass. Ignore the images and focus on the geometry of the frame. It is a cymatic pattern. For those new to the concept, cymatics is the study of visible sound. When you play a specific frequency into a plate of sand or water, the matter arranges itself into complex geometric mandalas. The higher the frequency, the more complex the pattern. The rose windows are identical to these sound patterns. They are frozen frequencies. They are not art. They are schematic diagrams of the energy that was flowing through that specific point in the machine. They are the frequency dial of the power station, set in stone. We are walking through the skeletal remains of a technology based on resonance. The walls are thick, often comprised of alternating layers of conductive iron and insulating brick or stone. In a battery, this layering is essential for the storage of charge. Why do so many ancient cathedrals contain iron ties and metal staples inside the stone blocks? Modern engineers argue it was for structural reinforcement. Yet the stone itself is strong enough to stand alone, and often the iron has rusted and cracked the stone, causing damage. Why would master masons introduce a flaw into their perfect work? Unless the metal wasn't there for support. Unless the metal was the wiring running through the dielectric stone, creating a massive capacitor capable of storing atmospheric charge. We must also address the inheritors. Look at the photographs from the mid-19th century, the earliest photographic evidence we have of these cities. What do you see? You see magnificent, towering cathedrals, pristine and overwhelming in their grandeur. And around them, mud, chaos, a few people in ill-fitting suits standing beside horses, looking bewildered, dwarfed by the architecture around them. They look like squatters who have stumbled into the palace of a vanished giant race. There is a complete disconnect between the civilization pictured and the architecture they supposedly built. The streets are often unpaved, covered in feet of mud, evidence of the liquefaction event we have discussed before, while the cathedral rises out of the muck, clean, sharp, and alien. They didn't build these. They found them, they dug them out, dusted them off, knocked the heads off the statues, or renamed them after saints, and claimed the glory for a church that merely repurposed the shell. This is the theft of our history. We have been convinced that the pinnacle of our architectural achievement occurred when we were at our most primitive. We are told that, as we advanced technologically, our buildings became uglier, cheaper, and more disposable. Does that make sense to you? Or does it make more sense that the timeline has been inverted? That the past was a time of high-tech etheric engineering, a civilization that understood the resonant frequency of the earth, and we are the survivors of a cataclysm living in the ruins, worshipping the components of a broken machine we no longer understand. As we move deeper into the cathedral, past the impossible doors and under the cymatic windows, we approach the heart of the device, the altar, the epicenter, and it is there that the true nature of the energy harvesting becomes undeniable. But to understand the altar, we first have to understand what was happening in the air above it. Stand in the nave of Chartres, or Cologne, or even St. Patrick's in New York, and close your eyes. What do you feel? A stillness, a heavy, pressing silence. The guidebooks tell us this is the weight of sanctity, the presence of the divine meant to humble the sinner. But those of us who have studied the properties of atmospheric electricity recognize it as something else entirely. That heaviness is ionization. You are standing inside a charged field. The air above the altar is not merely empty space. It is a conductive medium, purposefully altered by the geometry of the stone surrounding it. We must look upward into the vast vaulted ceilings that the mainstream historians claim were built by peasants with ropes and pulleys, driven only by religious fervor. Look at the ribs of the vaulting. Do they not resemble the intricate wiring of a circuit board? Or perhaps the veins of a leaf designed to transport fluids? In this case, the fluid is the ether itself. The official narrative insists that these ribbed vaults are purely structural, a clever Gothic innovation to support the weight of the stone roof. We are asked to believe that the specific, repetitive, fractal patterns of the ceiling ribs were chosen solely for aesthetics and stability. But when we overlay the schematic of a magnetron, the component inside your microwave that generates electromagnetic waves over the floor plan of a cathedral, the similarities are not just striking, they are mathematically precise. The cathedral is a cavity resonator. The shape of the ceiling is designed to trap, amplify, and focus acoustic and electromagnetic frequencies. It is not designed to hold a roof up. The roof is there to seal the chamber. The ribs are the waveguide. They channel the vibrational energy generated by the structure, preventing it from dissipating, folding it back upon itself until it reaches a critical threshold of resonance. And what is generating this vibration? What is the engine of this machine? Turn your eyes to the massive pipe organ looming in the loft, often situated directly opposite the altar. We accept the organ as a musical instrument, a tool for accompanying hymns. Yet, have you ever questioned why a place of worship requires an instrument of such colossal industrial power? Some of these organs contain thousands of pipes, ranging from the size of a pencil to the size of a refined tree trunk. They are capable of producing infrasound frequencies below the threshold of human hearing that can physically vibrate the water molecules in your cells, induce states of trance, or even levitate matter through acoustic propulsion. The layout of the cathedral places the congregation between these two poles, the altar and the organ. The people are not just observers. They are part of the circuit. The human body is bioelectric. It is 70% water. When the organ creates a standing wave within the cavity resonator of the nave, the congregation acts as the salt on a Chladni plate. They are being tuned. In the old world, before the frequency war shifted our standard tuning to the dissonant 440 Hz. To agitate and suppress our consciousness, these organs likely operated at 432 Hz, or specific solfeggio frequencies, designed for cellular regeneration and spiritual connection. The music was not entertainment. It was a utility. It was a medical and metaphysical technology. Consider the materials. The pipes are made of lead, tin, and zinc. The walls are granite, limestone, or marble stones with high quartz content. Quartz is piezoelectric. When you apply mechanical stress to quartzite, as the massive sonic pressure waves from a pipe, organite generates an electrical charge. Conversely, when you apply an electrical charge to quartz, it vibrates. The cathedral is a massive piezoelectric generator. The organ pumps sound energy into the stone walls. The stone walls convert that sonic pressure into an electromagnetic field, and the vaulted ceiling focuses that field down toward the center of the labyrinth, toward the altar. This brings us to the epicenter, the altar. In the modern church, this is a table for communion. But strip away the velvet and the wood and look at the older high altars. They are often boxers made of stone or gold-plated metal, situated under a massive canopy called a ciborium or baldachin. Look at the baldachin in St. Peter's Basilica. It is a massive bronze structure with twisted helical columns. Why twisted? In electrical engineering, a helix is an inductor. It creates a magnetic field. The baldachin is not a decorative roof, it is a coil. It is designed to direct the flow of energy coming down from the spire and the vaults, focusing it into the altar box itself. And what is inside the altar? By canon law, every Catholic altar must contain a relic, usually the bone of a saint. From a materialistic worldview, this is macabre superstition. But from a Tartarian perspective, bones are crystalline structures. They are lattice networks capable of holding a frequency charge. Are we looking at organic circuitry? Was the saint chosen not for their piety, but for the specific resonance of their genetic material? The altar acts as the capacitor. It stores the charge gathered by the spire and focused by the vaults. The sheer amount of gold used in these sacred spaces is the final clue. Gold is one of the best conductors of electricity we know. It is not. We are told the ancients used it because it was shiny and valuable. This is the reasoning of a child. They used it because it was functional. The gold leaf on the altar, the gold threads in the tapestries, the gold chalices, they are all ensuring maximum conductivity within the heart of the power station. When you see the old illustrations of the Ark of the Covenant, described as a gold-plated wooden box that could kill a man if he touched it improperly, you are looking at a description of a high-voltage capacitor. The cathedral altars are modeled on this technology. The priests, the initiates, wore specific vestments often woven with gold and silver thread. Were these ceremonial robes, or were they Faraday cages and grounding suits? If the voltage in these places was active, an unprotected human walking up to the high altar would be fried instantly. The rituals we see today, the swinging of the incense, thurible, for instance, might be cargo cult reenactments of practical safety measures. Smoke increases the conductivity of the air. Perhaps the original smoke was intended to visualize the ionization, or to create a conductive path for the discharge. We wander through these spaces today. taking photos with our phones, feeling a vague sense of awe, completely unaware that we are walking inside the engine room of a starship that has been permanently grounded. The energy is gone, the switches are broken, and the current inheritors have turned the control room into a theater. But if you know where to look, the evidence is still screaming at you. The scorch marks on the stone, the impossible acoustics, the iron bands hidden inside the masonry that connect the roof to the foundation. We have looked at the roof, the air, and the altar. We have seen how the energy was gathered and focused. But energy needs to flow. It needs a ground. And it needs a storage battery for when the atmospheric charge is low. To find that, we must descend. We must go where the public is rarely allowed, into the darkness beneath the limestone floor. We need to talk about the crypts. The descent is not merely physical. It is a journey back into the functional schematics of the machine. As we leave the soaring verticality of the nave, the air changes. It grows heavy, damp, and carries a distinct metallic tanga sensory memory, perhaps of ozone and ionized air that has been trapped in the limestone for centuries. They tell us these crypts are cities of the dead, ossuaries designed to house the remains of saints and bishops. We are taught to view these subterranean halls with a somber religious reverence, to whisper, to bow our heads. But look closely at the architecture of the undercroft. Strip away the later additions, the wooden coffins, the velvet ropes, the statues of weeping angels added during the renovation periods of the 17th and 19th centuries. What you are left with is a grid, a precise geometric lattice of massive squat pillars and low vaulted ceilings. In the world of electrical engineering, functionality dictates form. If the spire is the antenna, gathering the atmospheric ether, and the nave is the resonator, amplifying that frequency, then the crypt is the capacitor bank and the ground. Notice the thickness of the walls down here, compared to the soaring flying buttresses above. The sheer density of the stone. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to load-bearing necessity, a primitive struggle to keep the heavy roof from collapsing. But the math doesn't add up. The structural integrity provided by these foundations exceeds the weight of the cathedral by a factor of 10. It is over-engineered to an absurd degree, unless the weight wasn't the primary concern. If you are building a container for high-voltage telluric currents, you need insulation. You need mass. You need a dielectric material capable of preventing the charge from dissipating into the surrounding soil before it can be utilized. We see this pattern repeated in every major cathedral across the Old World, from Chartres to Seville, from St. Petersburg to New York. The layout of the crypt columns often perfectly mirrors the layout of modern industrial battery banks, rows upon rows of identical stone cells. In many of these spaces, explorers have found unexplained iron bars running through the center of the columns, deeply embedded, invisible from the surface. In a religious context, this is a waste of precious metal. In an electrical context, this is a conductive core surrounded by a stone insulator. It is a dry cell battery on a massive scale. But a battery needs an electrolyte. It needs a medium for the exchange of ions. And this brings us to the most overlooked feature of these sites, the water, almost without exception. Every single major Gothic cathedral is built directly on top of a subterranean water source. Aquifers, underground rivers, or man-made canals. The official narrative dismisses this as symbolic the living water of christening, or perhaps a practical source for the monks. But engineers don't build heavy stone structures on top of swampy, waterlogged ground unless the water is essential to the function of the building. We are told these builders were primitive, struggling with the elements. Yet they deliberately chose the most difficult geotechnical foundations possible. Why? Because water is the ground. In the early experiments of Tesla and Steinmetz, the earth itself was used as the return path for electrical circuits. The underground water tables act as the conductive medium, connecting the cathedral to the global telluric grid. The crypt isn't just a basement. It is the interface between the atmospheric energy harvesting of the spire and the earth currents below. It is the plug. Consider the so-called holy wells found in the crypts of places like These are deep shafts plunging into the water table. We have found diagrams often labeled as occult or alchemical that show copper or iron rods originally suspended in these wells. When you introduce a metal rod into a moving saline aquifer, you create a potential difference. You create a flow of electrons. The entire footprint of the cathedral is essentially a hydroelectric plant, but one that draws power not from a turbine, but from the ionic exchange between the sky and the earth, bridged by the architecture itself. And what of the sarcophagi, those magnificent stone boxes that dominate the center of these crypts? We are told they contain bodies, and indeed, sometimes they do now. But look at the construction of a sarcophagus. It is a box cut from a single block of granite or basalt, highly distinct, crystals with piezoelectric properties lined with metal, often lead or gold leaf, and then capped with a heavy stone lid. This is not a coffin. This is a containment vessel. If you look at the schematics of early arc rectifiers or mercury switches, the housing is identical. There is a growing body of research suggesting these sarcophagi were originally filled not with bones, but with mercury. Mercury is the lifeblood of the old tech, a superconductor, a liquid metal that, when spun or pressurized, creates powerful electromagnetic vortices. The tomb was the engine block. The saint inside was the fuel. It is a tragic irony that the inheritors, the parasitic civilization that moved into these structures after the mud flood, saw these empty stone boxes and, lacking any understanding of their purpose, decided they were perfect for hiding dead bodies. They turned a power plant into a graveyard. It is the ultimate psychological operation. By associating these high-energy zones with death, decay, and ghosts, they ensured that the population would be afraid to linger, afraid to investigate, afraid to touch. When you walk through a crypt, you often feel a cold draft, a sudden drop in temperature. They call it a ghostly presence. Physics calls it an endothermic reaction. It is the lingering effect of a system that is trying to draw heat to convert into energy. A machine that has been switched off, but still retains a ghost charge in its capacitors. You are shivering not because of spirits, but because you are standing inside a dormant engine block that is starving for fuel. Look at the floor tiles in the crypts. We often see intricate geometric patterns, alternating red and black, or white and black, conducting and insulating materials. We see the use of red brick, which we now know is composed of iron oxide and silica, a battery and a microchip compressed into a block. The foundations are red brick, the superstructure is limestone and granite. This is a deliberate layering of materials. To direct the flow of energy upwards, we have found the harvesting mechanism in the spire. We have found the storage and grounding mechanism in the crypt. But a machine needs more than just power and a ground. It needs a control mechanism. It needs a way to modulate the frequency. And for that, we have to look at the windows. Not the glass itself, but the geometry of the light and the sound, the cymatics. Cymatics is the study of visible sound and vibration. It is the missing key to decoding the rosette. When you place sand on a metal plata clatny playtand, vibrate it with a violin bow, the chaotic grains snap into rigid geometric order. As the frequency rises, the complexity of the mandala increases. Now, overlay a photograph of a cladni. Pattern generated at 432 Hz over the north rose window of Chartres Cathedral. It is not a similarity. It is a match, an exact mathematical overlay. Historians, in their infinite adherence to the authorized script, will tell you these windows represent the saints, the apostles, or the petals of a divine flower. They ask you to believe that medieval peasants, possessing nothing but chisels and superstition, accidentally stumbled upon the precise geometric visualization of acoustic wave mechanics. They want you to believe this was a decorative choice. But the builders of the old world did not do decoration in the way we understand it. Form always followed function. If the window looks like a frequency, it is because it was designed to oscillate at that frequency. These structures are vast resonance chambers. The stone itself, limestone and granite, has high quartz content silica, again giving it piezoelectric properties. When you subject piezoelectric crystals to mechanical stress or acoustic pressure, they generate an electric charge. Conversely, when you apply a charge, they vibrate. The cathedral is a two-way street, a transceiver. But to activate the stone, to wake up the quartz lattice within the masonry, you need a trigger. You need a vibration heavy enough to shake the foundations. Enter the pipe organ. We accept the presence of these massive pneumatic machines in churches without blinking. But step back and look at a pipe organ with fresh eyes. It is an industrial installation. It is a series of lead and tin tubes, ranging from inches to 30 feet in height. Powered by massive bellows, that require immense air pressure. Why do you need a machine capable of generating infrasound? Frequencies below 20 Hz that you feel in your viscera, rather than hear with your ears just to accompany a choir. You need that power if you are trying to drive a frequency into the stone structure to initiate a resonant coupling effect. When the organ plays the correct chord, the lost chord often mentioned in Masonic lore, the entire building begins to hum. The air inside the nave creates a standing wave. The geometry of the vaulted ceiling is not designed for aesthetics. It is a parabolic reflector, focusing this acoustic energy back down into the congregation, or perhaps focusing it into the iron armature running through the columns. The building becomes a cavity magnetron. The organ is the modulator. It sets the tempo of the energy extraction, and what of the light? If the sound is the vibration, the light is the carrier wave. The stained glass windows of the Tartarian era are an anomaly in manufacturing. We struggle to replicate the intensity of their colors today because we removed the essential ingredient heavy metals. The deep reds in old cathedral glass come from gold chloride, the blues from cobalt, the greens from uranium oxide. These act as filters, yes, but also as conductors. When sunlight hits the gold-infused glass, it excites the electrons on the surface. We are talking about the photoelectric effect, but on a macro scale. This specific spectrum of light, filtered through noble metals, filling a space that is vibrating at a specific acoustic frequency, creates a very specific electromagnetic environment. It creates an ionized atmosphere. This is why you feel different when you walk into an old cathedral. The air feels thick, electric. The skepticism of the modern mind dismisses this as a psychological reaction to grandeur. The truth seeker knows better. You are feeling the residual static of an atmospheric ionization chamber. The layout of the cathedral floor plan further confirms this technical purpose. It is almost always a Latin cross. We are told this is the symbol of the crucifixion. But look at an antenna diagram. Look at a circuit board. The cross shape is the most efficient geometry for a waveguide. The long nave acts as the acceleration chamber. The transept creates the intersection for the interference pattern to manifest, and the apse, the semicircular area where the altar sits, is the focal point. In the center of this focal point, usually directly under the dome or spire, sits the altar. In the ancient texts, the altar was not a table for bread and wine. It was the mercy seat. It was the point of contact. Often, these altars were made of solid gold or overlaid with golda, perfect conductor, and housed the relics. We are told these relics are the bones of saints. But consider the Ark of the Covenant, a box designed to hold a charge so lethal it would kill anyone who touched it without proper insulation, the priestly vestments. If the cathedral is the power plant, the altar is the terminal, the interface. The worship that occurred here was not about penitence. It was about maintenance and utilization. The chanting of the monks, a specific vocal resonance to maintain the standing wave when the organ was silent. The burning of incense, frankincense, and myrrh have high electrical properties when burned. The smoke creates a particulate suspension in the air, increasing the conductivity of the atmosphere inside the nave. It makes the air easier to charge. Everything, from the smell to the sound to the light, was a calculated variable in an equation of energy manipulation. So, we have a system. The spire pulls the etheric potential from the ionosphere. The iron-laced columns conduct it down. The crypts store and ground the excess. The organ and the chanting modulate the frequency of the vibration. The windows filter the solar radiation to optimize the ionization. But for what purpose? Was this merely to light up the street lamps of the past, to power the trams and the star cities? Or was the function more biological? This brings us to the concept of the healing cathedral. There are accounts, dismissed as miracles, of people being cured of ailments simply by sitting in these structures. If the human body is bioelectric, and disease is often a dissonance in the body's natural frequency, then stepping into a massive resonator tuned to the harmonic frequencies of the earth, and the ether would essentially reboot the biological system. They weren't just power stations for the grid. They were charging stations for the people. The layout of the pews, arranged in rows, mirrors the plates of a battery. The congregation, the water-filled, conductive human bodies, were not just observers. We were part of the circuit. We were the organic component necessary to bridge the gap between the macrocosmic energy of the atmosphere and the microcosmic energy of the Earth. However, something changed. The frequency was hijacked. The organs were In 1939, the International Standards Organization changed the standard tuning from 432 Hz to 440 Hz, a subtle shift, barely noticeable to the untrained ear, but devastating to the subconscious. 432 Hz is mathematical, consistent with the patterns of the universe, the Fibonacci sequence, the geometry of the rose window. 440 Hz is dissonant. It creates anxiety. It suppresses intuition. They took the machine that was designed to liberate us, to heal us, and to power our civilization, and they tweaked the dial just enough to turn it into a weapon of suppression. They didn't have to destroy the cathedrals. They just had to make us forget how to turn them on. They swapped the operating manual for a hymnal. They replaced the physics with theology, and the most critical component of this control mechanism wasn't the stone, or the glass, or even the organ. It was the operator, the bishop, the one who sat in the cathedra. The word cathedral literally means the seat. But who was sitting in the seat, and what were they controlling? To understand that, we have to follow the wires that leave the building. If you walk out the massive bronze doors of any major cathedral, whether it's St. Paul's in London or the Duomo in Milan, you look down. You are usually standing on a very specific geometric pattern. But if you look up and out, looking at the city layout itself, you begin to see the wires. Not physical cables draped across telephone poles. That is the primitive, ugly clutter of the modern parasitic system. I am talking about the ley lines, the telluric currents. The boulevards designed as energy channels. Look at Washington, D.C., look at Paris, look at the Vatican. The cathedral sits at the hub. Radiating out from that hub are long, straight avenues that pierce through the chaotic medieval streets, like lasers. Modern historians tell us these were built by Baron Haussmann, or L'Enfant, for beautification, or to make it easier for troops to march. This is the cover story. In a circuit board, traces must be straight to conduct the current efficiently from the capacitor to the resistor. The city is not a place for people to live. The city is a printed circuit board on a macro scale, and the cathedral is the step-down transformer sitting at the center of the web. So, where does the energy go when it leaves the spire? It travels along these radial avenues directed by the architecture itself. The red brick row houses lining these streets. Look closely. They act as the insulation, the iron fences, the grounding. And at the end of these long, straight boulevards, what do we almost always find? An obelisk. We are told the obelisks are stolen monuments from Egypt, dragged thousands of miles by people with wooden rafts and ropes, a logistical impossibility that we are just supposed to accept. But place an obelisk on a map of Rome or London. Draw the lines back to the cathedral. They are perfectly aligned. The obelisk is a wireless repeater. It is a Tesla tower carved from a single piece of granite which is rich in quartz crystal. Quartz is piezoelectric. When you put it under pressure, it generates a charge. An obelisk is massive. It is under immense gravitational pressure constantly. It is a standing wave generator, so the cathedral pulls the etheric electricity down from the ionosphere using the copper dome and the iron spire. It vibrates the structure with sound frequency from the organ to condition the energy. It concentrates it in the sanctuary, and then it transmits it wirelessly through the rose window, which acts as a directional antenna down the boulevards to the obelisks, which then distribute the field to the local neighborhood. Free energy, wireless, clean, a literal hum of life that kept the population healthy, kept the plants growing at accelerated rates, and illuminated the streets without a single burning wick. Now, let's go back inside to the operator, the bishop. If this is a power station, you need a technician, someone who knows how to handle high voltage. Have you ever looked at the ceremonial vestments of the high clergy? We see them as purely symbolic, ceremonial robes meant to invoke piety. But look with the eyes of an electrical engineer. They wear robes woven with gold and silver threads. We are told this is for opulence, to show the wealth of the church. But gold and silver are the two most conductive metals on earth. Why would you wrap your body in conductive wire if you are just reading a book? You wouldn't wear a Faraday cage suit if you were working in a high-voltage environment. The heavy, layered robes, the metallic embroidery, this was protective gear. And the mitre, the tall, pointed hat, it looks ridiculous to modern eyes. It resembles the open mouth of a fish, which leads many down the path of Dagon worship. Symbolism, there may be truth to that, but stick to the physics. The shape of the mitre is conical, open at the top, or split. It resembles a resonance cavity or a spark gap terminal. If the bishop is standing at the altar, the control panel, and the energy is flowing down from the spire directly through the conductive columns. He needs to be shielded, but he also needs to be connected. The staff he carries, the crozier, it is always curved at the top, like a hook, often with a crystal embedded in the spiral. It is a grounding rod. It is a tool for manipulating the ark. They weren't praying, they were operating. Consider the holy water fonts at the entrance. Again, we are given a theological explanation. Ritual purification. You dip your hand in, you cross yourself. But look at the fonts in the oldest cathedrals. They are gigantic clamshells, often made of porphyry or conductive marble, sometimes lined with gold. Water is a conductor, especially if it is salted. Holy water is always salted. It is an electrolyte solution. When the citizens of this Tartarian civilization entered the structure, they dipped their hands into the electrolyte solution. They were grounding themselves. They were completing the circuit, ensuring that their biological bodies were harmonized to the frequency of the building before they entered the main field. If you walked into a 432 Hz charged electromagnetic field carrying a static charge of dissonance, it could be physically jarring. The water neutralized you. It prepared the biological vessel to receive the charge. Everything had a function. The incense, ionization of the air to increase conductivity. The chanting, acoustic levitation and frequency stabilization. The layout of the pews, the rows of a capacitor bank. But then, the event happened. The mud flood, the reset. The grid went down. The original builders, the giants, the Tartarians, the master engineers, were wiped out or removed. And the survivors, or perhaps the invaders, the parasitic elite that we deal with today, they inherited these shells. They walked into these magnificent power plants, and they didn't know how to turn them on. They saw the vestments, but they didn't know they were hazmat suits. They saw the fonts, but they didn't know they were grounding terminals. So they created a cargo cult. They mimicked the motions without understanding the mechanics. They put on the gold robes and walked around mumbling words they didn't understand, hoping the machine would start. But the machine was dead. The atmospheric conditions had changed. The ether was no longer as dense, and critically, they had changed the frequency. They took the operating manual, which described the physics of light and sound, and they allegorized it. The light of the world became a metaphor for a deity, rather than a literal description of the atmospheric electricity that lit the lamps. The living water became a spiritual concept rather than a reference to the energized, structured water created by the station. They squatted in the ruins of a superior civilization and called it their own. And to ensure that no one would ever figure out how to turn the power back on, they introduced the concept of mystery. You aren't supposed to understand how it works. It is a mystery of faith. This is the ultimate gaslight. By telling you that the building is the house of God, they prevent you from asking why it looks like a high-voltage terminal. By telling you the bishop is a holy man, they prevent you from asking why he is dressed like a conductive lightning rod. They hide the technology in plain sight, protected by the ultimate firewall, religious dogma. But the stones, remember, the geometry doesn't lie. And if you look at the crypts, the basements, the places they don't let the public see, you find the remnants of the storage systems. The batteries dot in every major cathedral. Beneath the altar, there is a crypt. Often, these crypts are filled with sarcophagi. We are told, these are the tombs of saints. But have you ever noticed that these sarcophagi are almost always made of heavy granite, lined with lead or zinc, and sealed hermetically? We assume there is a body inside. But what if there isn't? What if the saint's bones are a cover story for what was actually stored in those lead-lined granite boxes? Granite, lead, sealed. That is how you store radioactive material. That is how you build a massive Leyden jar to store the excess charge gathered by the spire. Above dot, we are walking through a graveyard of technology, mistaking it for a graveyard of people. Let that sink in. A graveyard of technology. When you descend into the crypts of Chartres or Notre Dame or St. Peter's in Rome, you are struck by a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The air is heavy, charged. The silence there is not empty. It is pregnant with static. We are told to feel reverence for the dead, but the instinctual feeling is one of caution. You are standing next to dormant high-voltage equipment. Consider the specific construction of these sarcophagi. We are taught that granite was chosen for its durability to last through the ages. But in the context of the Old World, durability is merely a secondary benefit. The primary function of granite, particularly red granite, which is rich in quartz crystal, is piezoelectricity. When you apply pressure to quartz, it generates an electric charge. When you apply an electric charge to it, it vibrates. The entire cathedral, tons upon tons of stone pressing down on these foundation pillars, is a massive pressure generator. The weight itself is the engine. And what do we find inside these granite chambers? Lead line. Any electrical engineer will tell you that lead is not just for shielding against radiation. It is a critical component in the construction of primitive capacitors. A capacitor is simply two conductors separated by an insulator. Granite, lead, copper embellishments, gold leaf. These are not decorative choices made by superstitious monks in the Dark Ages. These are schematic requirements. For the storage of electromagnetic energy, mainstream historians want you to believe that a civilization supposedly struggling with the bubonic plague and using wooden carts had the excess resources to mine, transport, and perfectly mill granite slabs weighing 20 tons, hollow them out with copper chisels, and line them with lead sheets, just to honor a bishop whose name most people would forget in a generation. It defies logic. It defies the economic reality of the purported time period. But it aligns perfectly if these were the battery banks of a citywide power grid. This leads us to the concept of relics. The Church is obsessed with relics. Bones, fingers, vials of blood. They are kept in ornate, gold-plated boxers, reliquaries that look suspiciously like components you might find on a modern circuit board. We hear stories of these relics glowing or humming or healing the sick who came near them. Official history calls these miracles, we call them, radiation or frequency therapy. If you have a functioning atmospheric energy plant and you dismantle the user interface but leave the core running, you get leaks, you get anomalies. The healing power of the saints was likely just the residual ionization of the air around these unshielded power sources. The holy fire that descended on the apostles, St. Elmo's fire. Plasma discharge. The terminology changes, but the physics remain the same. Now, look up from the crypt. Follow the columns back up to the nave. If the crypt is the battery and the spire is the antenna, what is the control mechanism? How did they modulate this immense power, drawn from the ether? They didn't use switches and dials. They used sound, the pipe organ. The presence of massive pipe organs in almost every cathedral is perhaps the most glaring clue that we are looking at a machine. We are told they are for hymns, for worship, but look at the sheer scale of them. Some of these organs have pipes that are 30 feet tall, capable of producing infrasound frequencies so low they cannot be heard by the human ear, only felt, frequencies that can resonate with the stone. Structure itself. Why would a choir need a background instrument that can shake the foundations of the building? Unless the shaking was the point. We know that sound is vibration. We know that vibration affects matter. This is the science of cymatics. When you play a specific tone against a plate of sand, the sand arranges itself into complex geometric patterns. Now look at the rose windows of the great cathedrals. Look at the floor tiling patterns. Look at the ceiling vaults. They are cymatic patterns. They are literally sound frozen in stone. The pipe organ wasn't an instrument for music. It was the frequency modulator for the power station. By playing specific chords, specific frequencies, the operators, who we now call priests, could tune the resonance of the cathedral. They could increase the draw from the atmosphere or dampen it. They could direct the energy into the water flowing beneath the cathedral, holy water structuring it, charging it. It is a technology of harmony. The music of the spheres wasn't poetry. It was an instruction manual. But somewhere along the line, the manual was lost. The inheritors of these buildings, the parasites who took over after the last reset, didn't know how to turn the machine on. Or perhaps they were too afraid to. So they gutted the mechanism. They removed the mercury from the spinning vortex engines. They smashed the resonating jars. They replaced the conductive gold latticework with heavy, dull iron. And they repurposed the control panel of the organ to play. Funeral dirges for a civilization they helped bury. When you sit in a cathedral today, listening to the organ echo off the cold stone walls, you are hearing the ghost of a machine. You are sitting inside a dead engine marveling at the hubcaps, while the engine block has been stolen. The acoustics are still there. The geometry is still there. The potential is still there. Have you ever wondered why these buildings always feel cold, even in the summer? It's not just the stone. It says the design. They were built to act as cooling towers. The airflow, the height, the ventilation shafts, disguised as architectural flourishes. It is all thermal management for a system running at high amperage, and the windows, the stained glass. We are told they were Bibles for the illiterate poor. That is the cover story. But notice the colors: the red, the blue, the gold. These glasses are made with colloidal metals. Gold chloride for red, cobalt for blue, nanoparticles of metal suspended in glass. Why does that matter? Because colloidal metal glass acts as a filter for specific wavelengths of light and energy. The sun hits the stained glass, and the light is transformed, polarized. The interior of the cathedral is bathed in a specific spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. It wasn't about pretty pictures of the apostles. It was about creating a specific energetic environment inside the cavity of the Resonator. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was ornamental. That is the great lie of the Beaux-Arts and Gothic revivals. They tell us our ancestors were obsessed with decoration because they were primitive and feared empty spaces horror vacui. No, they were obsessed with function. The beauty was a byproduct of the perfect geometry required for the flow of etheric current. We look at a circuit board today, and to the uninitiated, it looks like a city map. It has lines, towers, capacitors that look like silos. If you shrank a man down and put him on a motherboard, he would think he was in a metropolis. Now, reverse that. Scale the motherboard up, make the capacitors granite, make the wires copper-wrapped columns, make the transistor a stained glass filter. You get a cathedral. But if this is true, if these were free energy power stations, why did they stop? What happened to turn these palaces of light into tombs of darkness? The answer lies in the destruction. The systematic targeting of these structures during the wars of the 19th and 20th centuries. They didn't just bomb cities randomly. They targeted the spires. They targeted the organs. They targeted the tech.